Hello, hello. There we go. Hey everyone. Thank you for joining us today for another Wine Wednesday. Just waiting for my colleague and namesake Steffan Griffiths from Nyetimber to join us. Yep, there he is.
Hi there.
Hi Stefan, thanks so much for joining us, and especially during midnight at your time.
As we all say, it's 5 p.m. somewhere, and that works.
It's 5 p.m. somewhere. Well, we're very happy to have you on with us here today, and like our promo posts, if you've seen them, have noted, we will be diving into the category of English sparkling wine and English wines in general, and of course through the lens of Nyetimber, where you have been a brand ambassador for how long now?
Just over 4 years. Yeah, I started in April 2016, March 2016. So yeah.
Amazing, amazing. So I was figuring that we'd just dive into English sparkling wine as a category. If you could just give us a little bit of a background from what you know better than most, I would imagine, and then talk a little bit about Nyetimber, and then we'll take it from there. But we'll have questions towards the end of our session. But of course, if you have questions, let us know what you're drinking, and we'll make sure to address all your questions towards the end.
Looking forward to it. Well, thanks for having me, Stefan. It's it's my first ever Instagram live, and it's midnight, and that's great. It's
share that experience with you.
Everything's unusual at the moment, so I've embraced it. I for the sake of people who are just joining now, I'm not sure, of course, how much everybody here knows about English sparkling wine, but I would hazard a guess that most people in the world probably don't know too much about English sparkling wine, because it's still quite a recent thing. And it wasn't that long ago that the idea of English wine of a quality level anyway was just unheard of. And basically England's made wine for a very long time. I mean, England's had 2 millennia of viticultural history here, but I think we always had the best wines from around the world on our shores, from France, Germany, Italy, Spain, Australia, California, wherever it might be. So people, I think it's probably fair to say, people in the UK tended not to feel a need to, identify what we had here in terms of the potential. And so a lot of the grapes that were grown here were kind of, they weren't necessarily the most exciting grape varieties in the world. I think that's fair to say. But the big change was, it was with us, it was with Nyetimber. So just over 30 years ago now, in the late 1980s, the owners of Nyetimber, who actually were an American couple, Stuart and Sandy Moss from Chicago, they had just moved into the Nyetimber estate, which is a country estate down in West Sussex, sort of idyllic, leafy, quintessentially English countryside. And a manor house that's been there for
already.
It's beautiful. I mean, the house itself is almost 1,000 years old. The earliest written record of Nyetimber is almost 1,000 years ago, in the year 1086. So you can see the appeal as to why they wanted to move there.
Yes.
They also had a huge passion for wine, and they were the first ones to realize that basically what we had down in Nyetimber, but in more general terms in the south of England, was we had a very similar soil, very similar climate, rainfall, sunlight hours, all of the raw ingredients of viticulture, extremely similar to Champagne just across the channel. So they thought, okay, well, why therefore wouldn't we be able to make a similar style of wine here? And that's what they started doing. So we planted Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and Pinot Meunier, the Holy Trinity of sparkling wine, and we just made traditional sparkling wine, and we were the first people in England to exclusively grow those grapes exclusively to make sparkling wine.
Exactly.
And that was 32 years ago. Our first vintage was in 1992, and when we started, it was seen as unusual, which is putting it politely. People didn't think this would be successful. This wouldn't take off, and nowadays more than 2/3 of all wine made in the UK is that kind of sparkling wine, and the number of producers has increased more than 10 times in 3 decades. So we've really identified what England does best. Yeah.
Well, that's great, and I've certainly had the pleasure to taste some of these wines, and The category is something that I myself didn't know much about before we had the good fortune of working with you guys at Nyetimber. So I think it's very safe to say, as you said, that it's still a category that's unexplored for many, and still much to learn.
Oh, hugely. I mean, for us as well, we are the pioneers of English sparkling wine, and we're very proud of that. But at the same time, 30 years in the world of wine is not a huge thing. I mean, compared to some of the wine regions in the world. And even in recent years, I mean, it's particularly in the last decade and a half, I think it's fair to say that Nyetimber's really hit its stride. And that's a lot to do with the people behind Nyetimber. So a couple of key years for us. 2006 was when Eric Hirima, who's the owner and CEO of Nyetimber, he joined Nyetimber then, and he was very much joining for the potential. You know, he's a lifelong wine enthusiast, really saw the potential in terms of what could be done at Nyetimber and what could be done in England, and was committed to really elevating the whole country in terms of the quality production up to a global level. So Eric's, you know, very much involved in the business, very keen to make everything we do the best that it possibly can be. And in sort of chasing that goal, 1 year after Eric took over, we were joined by our winemakers, our current winemaking team, who have been there since 2007, who are a married couple, Sherry Spriggs and Brad Greatrix, who are Canadians. They studied, practiced, made wine all over the world, but then came to taste a bottle of Nyetimber years before they came to work at Nyetimber. They sort of semi by chance came across a bottle. Sherry's father is English, and he came over to Canada to visit them, and they asked, "Can you bring back a bottle of this?" And they were, you know, struck by firstly how good the wine was, but also how much more potential there was that was perhaps not yet fully tapped. And so years went by, but this always stuck at the back of their minds, this kind of, you know, dream job scenario, go and realize the potential of Nyetimber. And so in 2007, they came to work. They came to work here, and they've been at the helm ever since.
The rest is history, as they say.
Yeah, indeed. And speaking of history, we try and make history as well. There was a particular sort of moment, I think, that vindicates their quality level, which was that a couple of years ago now, just under 2 years ago, Sherry's the head winemaker, by the way. So Sherry's head winemaker and Brad is winemaker. So that's the order of play. And Sherry. Yeah, exactly. Sherry was awarded the International Wine Challenge, so the kind of Oscars of the wine world. For those who might not know, she was awarded the sort of best sparkling winemaker in the world trophy, which is a fantastic accolade in its own right.
Absolutely.
When you consider that for just under 4 decades, this award's been going, and she was the first winemaker from outside of Champagne to ever win, and she was the first woman to ever win as well. So a bit of a sort of combo breaker. Remarkable. Yeah.
She's an impressive woman, very much so.
Incredibly, yeah.
And they both, of course. So in sort of your day-to-day duties, how much of an interaction do you have with the winemakers?
So I guess I should probably properly introduce myself. I'm a brand ambassador at Nyetimber, which is it basically means I'm involved in every part of the business. So most of my time I do spend sort of talking about the wines and hosting tastings and masterclasses and the like. But I do interact with the winemakers and our viticulturalists and spend a lot of time down in the vines. So it's quite hard to define a sort of normal day in the life of a brand ambassador, but I probably spend about a third of my time based in London and sort of traveling around the UK, a third of my time down in the vines, down in Sussex, and then a third of my time sort of traveling and increasingly internationally. I was actually meant to be coming out to the States in a couple of weeks for the Nantucket Food and Wine Festival, but that is postponed. So
unfortunately, we won't. Go ahead.
Sorry, Stefan, I didn't catch that.
No, I just said, unfortunately, you won't be enjoying your company just yet, but hopefully soon enough. Stateside.
Soon.
But fun question here.
Interaction with the winemakers. They don't trust me with the fermentations, which is a very wise decision to make.
Fair enough.
I
Fair enough.
do a lot of quality control though for the finished product.
Amazing, amazing. We got a fun question here just earlier. Does the Queen drink Nyetimber? I feel like we have some supporting data to.
I can neither confirm nor deny. Yeah, the Queen is. I mean, the royal family on the whole have been great supporters of English wine for many years, including obviously Nyetimber. We actually had one particularly sort of lovely moment for us was in 2012. It was the Queen's Diamond Jubilee, so 60 years on the throne. Not bad, man. And one of the many sort of celebrations that was going on is there was a procession of boats going down the River Thames and the royal family on the royal barge. And what did the Queen have in her glass? Nyetimber, Blanc de Blanc. So that was fantastic.
Not too shabby.
Not too shabby.
He's drinking well.
She is.
So, well, and then Nyetimber has some royal heritage, if you will. The backstory of the land. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Way before the wine side of things, as I mentioned, the history of Nyetimber, the estate, goes back to the year 1086. And I guess that was a sort of slight royal link, because the reason we know it existed back then is there was a book that was written by King William I, or commissioned rather by King William I, and formerly known as William the Conqueror. And he basically wanted to know all of the properties in England, how big they were, how much money they made, so he knew how much he could tax them. So that was the first time that Nyetimber was mentioned. It was called Nyetimber. Anybody listening who speaks fluent Anglo-Saxon will know, of course, that means new wood. And then in the years that followed, in the hundreds and hundreds of years that followed, it had some interesting owners. So for a while, it was owned by a community of Benedictine monks, monks who quite like to drink. So there was a little bit of a precursor there. But then when the monks were all kicked out of the Nyetimber and various other properties by another king, Henry VIII. And Henry, of course, quite well known for his various nuptials. When he wanted to move on to the second wife and divorce his first, and he had to start his own church to do that, he dissolved all of the monasteries, and all of the properties, like Nyetimber, became property of the king, belonged to the royal estate. Now, we're pretty sure he never lived there himself. He had much bigger houses elsewhere. But we do know that it was quite significant to him, because he ended up gifting it twice during his lifetime to two very important people, one of which was his advisor, Thomas Cromwell, and then the second was his fourth wife, Anne of Cleves. She was the one who survived them all. She didn't get it. She just got divorced, and he actually was quite good friends with her. So when they divorced, he gave her a few houses in the south of England, and Nyetimber was one of them. So it's a really, a real history of English history books, the whole lot.
Ingrained with the country's history. That's amazing. Well, one quick question that I saw pop up before we dive into the wines and tasting here from Vino Concierge. What makes the Nyetimber terroir, soil and climate, so special and suitable for this type of wine production? She's had the classic Cuvee and calls it a revelation, which I would certainly agree with.
Excellent. Revelation. I like that. It's a very good question, which would have a pretty long answer, and I can talk about that for hours. But the crux of it, to sort of break it down into the two main elements. So the soil, which obviously is very important. We have a very similar kind of soil to what we find across the channel. It's not exactly the same. And at Nyetimber, we actually have 10 different vineyards across the south of England now, so spread across 3 counties. Sussex is where we started, West Sussex, but we have vineyards in Hampshire and Kent as well. And between those 3 counties, we have 2 different soil types. So we have green sand soil in Sussex predominantly, and we have chalk soil in Hampshire and Kent. And they have similarities to them. They're both very free draining. Water goes through the soil quite easily. Great for the vines, means they're really sort of digging deep into the soil for nutrition. But they do bring different elements as well. So again, in sort of quite general terms, we find that chalk brings a fair amount of that sort of really classic chalky minerality, citrus fruit, laser pure focus. Green sand, it has that, absolutely, but it also brings a little bit more kind of rounded fruit character, a little bit more texture, a little bit more plush fruit. And we love both of them equally. We don't see any difference in quality. What we love about it is that we've got effectively 2 different soil types to play with, plus the hundred different plots of parcels of fruit that we have in our vineyards. So it allows Sherry and Brad, when they're making the wines, to work with so many different components, so many different flavors. Then the other side of things, of course, is the climate. We have an English climate, which is not perhaps what most people would think that means. It's not. It is raining right now out of my window, but it's usually pretty good.
Sounds about right.
Yeah. And down in the vineyards, actually, it's really beautiful weather most of the time, and there's good reason for that. Where we are in West Sussex is the sunniest county in England. We do our best to maximize all of that as well. So all of our vineyards are on south-facing slopes. And also we only plant our vines because we only use our own vineyards. We don't buy any grapes or sell our grapes to anybody. So when we're planting a vineyard, we have to consider the perfect site. And more often than not, that also means it's got to be somewhere that's a little bit protected from the weather. So in Sussex, for example, we've got our vineyards here, we've got the sea over here, and then in the middle, there's the South Downs. So these hills that kind of act as a barrier for a lot of wind, rain, hail, whatever it might be that comes in off the coast. So that's the kind of short answer, I guess. We can go into this into a huge amount of detail another time.
We have to have a whole episode on it
Quite right.
down the road. Well, before we dive into the actual tasting, which I'm extremely excited about, could you maybe take us through the current portfolio and sort of, if it makes sense, in a chronological kind of way, like what Nyetimber started with and where we are now?
Yes, I've actually got behind me, you can tell I've been doing a few of these kind of Zoom and Skype and all these tastings. Here's some I prepared earlier, because just a sort of brief word about what we make at Nyetimber. We make sparkling wine. We make traditional method sparkling wine just from Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, Pinot Meunier. That's all we've made since day one, and that's all we have plans to make, certainly for the future. So when we started with one wine. The first wine we ever made was our Blanc de Blanc. The first vintage of that was 1992. And that's because the Chardonnay vines were the first to go in 1988. And for many years, we made just the Blanc de Blanc and the classic Cuvee as well, which I'll touch on in a minute because we're going to taste some. And then it was only after Eric, Sherry, and Brad took over that we introduced 5 other wines into the Nyetimber range. And each of them had a reason to be there. It wasn't as if we just wanted to kind of expand it for the sake of it. They've all got these stories. They've all got these fantastic origins. And for example, we started making a rosé in 2007. And that was really the result of, well, it's 2 things. It was wanting to work more with Pinot Noir, which had never been the kind of dominant grape at Nyetimber. And Sherry and Brad had just been working in Oregon and loving Pinot Noir out there. So they wanted to see how this could be, brought to the fore. Also, Eric really wanted to look at a rosé that was very different from the rest of the range. It wasn't going to be just a pink version of what we already did. So the rosé, those 2 ideas came together to make that. We started making a demi-sec, England's first ever demi-sec sparkling wine, which initially we just made for ourselves, really. You know, we did lunches, we did dinners at restaurants and with chefs, and we had Nyetimber throughout the meal, and we got to dessert, had to go get a bottle of Sauterne, Tokai, and that's absolutely fine, but thought, wouldn't it be nice if we had our own wine? So Sherry and Brad made a wine, a couple of 100 bottles, and eventually it got so in demand that we had to label it and we had to sell it and we had to make it available. So got to give the people what they want.
Of course.
And then the sort of the slightly sort of more small production tier as well. Not that we're a big producer, but we make a few other wines. So Tillington, which is a single vineyard wine. One of our vineyards in West Sussex that we identified had this particular plot of Pinot Noir in it that had, I don't know, just more complexity, intensity so many times we found. So we had to capture it. So England's first ever single vineyard sparkling wine. We like doing the first ever things.
It's a good look on Nyetimber, so keep it up.
Do we can. And then the last sort of first ever we did was the most recent release and certainly the most exciting for a long time now is our Prestige Cuvées named 1086. So we just released those in the UK just a year and a half ago. and they're steadily making their way around the world. But yeah, again, England's first ever prestige cuvee, and the idea was that we would have something that represented the best of the best of what we have, and that means the best fruit from the best parcels, from the best vineyards, and the best vintages. If we find that occurs, then we'll bottle it and we'll capture it. And just, a few thousand bottles of a white and a rosé, and it's sort of the next step in English winemaking. I think that's fair to say. So that's where we are recently. But Stefan, I know you've got a bottle of something there, and I have a bottle as well.
I do. I have a bottle of the classic cuvee here, and I just wanted to leave it unopened just so people can see how stunning the bottle is, and to also share the audio experience of popping the cork, which I think is most of our favorite sound.
Well,
I'm going to go ahead and open my bottle.
I've done a little bit of quality check beforehand, so mine is already open. But I put a stopper on it, so it should still make a pop when I open it. We'll find out.
Oh, okay. Lovely. Go ahead. And then there's one quick question here while we're opening the bottles. Is the demi-sec the normal non-vintage with greater dosage?
No, not at all. Thank you for that question, Richard. It is not. We actually, some producers do that. Some producers will just take their kind of their classic non-vintage and just the dosage for a demi-sec or for a drier wine. But we make it specifically for the demi-sec. So it's 100% Chardonnay. We do that because Chardonnay's sort of lovely, pure, clean acidity just really cuts through the sweetness and keeps it very balanced. And any wine like that, we know what we're going to make in the final instance. So it's a specific blend. Yeah.
Lovely. Well, thank you for sharing. So I think without further ado, let's go ahead and taste the Nyetimber Classic Cuvée.
Taste.
I have my pour here. A lovely color.
Cheers.
Cheers.
And cheers to you who's watching at home. I hope you're drinking something delicious, whether it's Nyetimber or whatever makes you happy.
Please share what you're drinking, and we see your questions coming through. We'll definitely make sure that we address them towards the end.
For sure.
So tell us a little bit about the Classic Cuvée.
So the Classic Cuvée, I mean, it's had to be the wine that we open, we taste, we talk about, because it's the signature wine of Nyetimber. It's our most famous wine. I would say probably it's fair to say that it's the flagship wine of England, arguably. I mean, we find that it's definitely the wine through which most people get to know Nyetimber, and it's still the wine that a lot of people get to know English wine for the first time. So it's got to be the best that it can be. It's in many ways it's the most important wine that we make, even though it's kind of the first step of the ladder in terms of the Nyetimber range. Now, we've been making this since 1993, so we've had almost 3 decades of practice making this now, and in many ways it hasn't changed. It's always been a blend of all 3 grapes that we grow. So it's usually predominantly Chardonnay, around 60% Chardonnay. Chardonnay, of course, bringing that lovely citrus fruit character as the only white grape that we grow, and that really nice acidity that acts as a backbone. Pinot Noir is about 30%, a bit more red fruit, a bit more structure, a bit more body. And then 10% about that is Pinot Meunier, which is definitely the sort of the least known of the 3, but it plays an important role for us. It gives this lovely apricot stone fruit character, an extra kind of layer of fruit complexity to the wine. So as I mentioned briefly before, that's taken all from our own vineyards. We plant our own vines, we look after our own vineyards, and after a few years, we will take the first harvest off the grapes, off the vines, take that to our pressing center, press the juice, and make that into wine. So all of our wines made in the traditional method, all bottled down in the Nyetimber winery in West Sussex. And then we leave our wines for quite an extended amount of time to sit in the bottle on the lees, so with the yeast that's fermented the wine, to develop a different level of flavor, a different level of complexity. So in England, which doesn't have a huge amount of wine laws, rules, legislations compared to France, for example, by law, you have to age your wine for a minimum of 9 months. And at Nyetimber, we age all of our wines for a minimum of around 3 years. And we just want to get more of that kind of toasty, biscuity, lovely brioche complexity that comes with that amount of aging to it. So this has had about probably 3.5 years on the bottle. If you are with a bottle of Nyetimber at home, you can find this out for yourself, actually, because we don't put all the winemaking dates on the label, but what we do is just on the bottom left here, so any wine geeks among you will enjoy this. There's a little code, and if you put that into our website, it tells you the exact breakdown of grapes. For any multi-vintage wines, it tells you the exact breakdown of what vintages and how much of each vintage. And also we give the day the wine was bottled, the day it was riddled, so turned upside down, and the day it was disgorged. And we think this is, we think this is essential, to be honest. We think, people deserve to know these things, and we just want to share the information. We think however, we are the first people to put the riddling date on. People have been putting disgorging dates on for a little while, but riddling dates, we just want to give as much information as possible, and
I think that's amazing. Yeah, because that's not as common for practice as you would think just yet. So I think it's amazing that people can log on and just find out what those exact details for their bottle that they have, which is, of course,
it only started in Champagne in the sort of 80s when Bruno Paillard was the first person to put disgorgement dates on. And when people started doing it, a lot of producers were kind of like, well, what are you doing? You're sort of ruining the mystery of this. And okay, there's plenty of mystery to wine, and that's a lovely thing. But I think these days people want to know, what are they spending their money on, and why does this make them feel that way? And they want to understand what they're drinking. And I think we should absolutely encourage that, because that's how people get to know a winery. That's how they get to have a real relationship with a wine. And the more information, if people want it, the better. So we're really proud of that.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. Just addressing some of the comments, Jeff, you certainly need to try these bubbles. We'll make that happen. Jules, the SRP on the Classic Cuvee is $55 in the US currently. And for online retail, like Eleanor is just sharing here, it's available on Gary's Wines. It's available at wine.com, Wine Searcher, and several other online retailers as well. So should be widely available with nationwide shipping. Highly recommend you put in an order. The tasting notes on the Classic Cuvee, if you just linger there a little bit and then maybe dive into some pairing suggestions.
Sure, yeah. I mean, also, very subjective in terms of people will taste what they taste, of course. But I think with the Classic Cuvee, there's certain things that we expect to get. And first of all, it's a Chardonnay dominant wine. So you always get this lovely lemon zest, sort of lemon peel, candied lemon peel, freshness to it, lots of crisp zing. We do find as well that a lot of our wines, and by extension some English wines, they get those kind of English fruit flavors. So a bit more kind of green apple, orchard fruits. It's all about clean and really sort of precise. It's not about sort of rich, decadent styles. It's about this sort of elegance and delicacy. So the fruit profile is definitely at the core, but then with those 3 years of aging as well, you do get that biscuity brioche character.
You really do.
I once had somebody once said to me that our wines reminded him of liquid croissant, which was a new one to me, but I quite resonated.
Yeah, that's a good comparison any day.
So the idea with this wine really is people ask when should I drink it, what should I drink it with, and that sort of thing. And the answer is pretty much to an extent whatever you'd like. It's absolutely happy on its own, and start of a meal, start of a party, end of a party, whatever it might be. But if you want to start pairing foods with it as well, I remember before I worked at Nyetimber not fully kind of grasping just how versatile great sparkling wine can be, and now I can talk to death about it. So I think with these kind of wines, you want to be looking at the more delicate end of the food spectrum. So it's about freshness, it's about fresh seafood, whether that's oysters, mussels, whether it's really sort of clean fish. Here in the UK, we've got lots of lovely sort of spring vegetables at the moment, asparagus, that sort of thing, just really, really clean and fresh and delicious. Some of the other wines in the range, like the rosés, for example, they've got a bit more body, a bit more Pinot Noir intensity. They can start to really stand up to things like poultry. A particular sort of favorite of ours here is Nyetimber Rosé on Christmas Day with turkey, and it pairs really well. So
that's lovely.
It is.
Big turkey fan on this end, so that you really sealed the deal for me there.
I guess it could be a Thanksgiving thing as well.
Yeah, perfect for us US folk.
Mm-hmm.
So within the portfolio, and I know this is probably a taboo question, but do you have personal favorites or personal favorites for maybe like certain consumption opportunities?
Oh, for the latter, definitely. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I guess that horses for courses applies. But in terms of a perennial favorite, no. And that's kind of a good thing, I think. And it's, you know, there's that kind of cop out answer, you know, when people say, oh, it's like choosing my favorite child or something like that. But I was talking about this with Brad recently, actually, and he said, look, all of these wines have different identities. They have different reasons for existence. So they're different wines. So if we ever said, oh, you know, the Blanc de Blanc is it's never our favorite, then we shouldn't be making it anymore. You know, if it's failing to do what it needs to do, then we wouldn't make it. So everything that exists right now is because they all have a different story to tell. In terms of when I drink them, though, I mean, obviously something like 1086 is a real special occasion wine. It was my birthday last Wednesday, actually, so that was 10.
Happy birthday! Happy belated.
Thank you. Isolation birthday. So yeah, that was a special occasion. I mean, classic Cuvee. Any party, any kind of function that I'm at, and Nyetimber's at, it's classic Cuvee all the way. I've had a particular sort of love for Tillington recently, our Pinot Noir single vineyard wine. I don't know what it is, but in the last few months, it's just been particularly generous, particularly complex. I mean, these wines are so age-worthy, though. I mean, we're drinking them now when they're sort of, you know, in their first decade of their life, but we do age these wines, and we do keep back some old stock. So sometimes I'm lucky enough to try something from 2003 or 1992, even the first wine, and that's, you know, an occasion in itself. So it's basically an endless list of what wines when, but that's what's great about it, because there's always different occasions.
That is very true, very true. And I wanted to add, just from a personal standpoint, I feel like English sparkling wine, for me, in my palate, really combines what I like about different types of other sparkling wines, and somehow just like finds that fine balance and brings it into one. And I feel like the classic Cuvee is such a great expression to sort of elaborate that. So for me, a personal favorite for sure.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I just to sort of pick out one word you used there, which I think of as kind of the best compliment anyone could ever say, which is balance. You know, I think every wine theoretically should have something different to express from wherever it is around the world, or wherever it is in the range. And we're not making champagne, you know, we're different soils with the similarities, but we're making fine English sparkling wine. But wherever it's from, the key thing is balance. I think that's what elevates a wine from being, you know, a perfectly nice bottle of wine to a fine wine or a great wine. It's the idea that no one element is out of balance, out of equilibrium. So, you know, we put a lot of effort into making it this way. I'm glad to hear we've succeeded.
Yeah, it's to your credit and Sherry and Brad's, of course. But because that balance is hard to achieve, and I feel like they've just knocked it out the park. So if you haven't tried Nyetimber, please make it a priority. I think that that gives us a really good background on Nyetimber, English sparkling wine, the category, and your personal background as well. We'd love to open it up to a few more questions before we let you go to bed, as it's nearing 1 a.m. And
I'm charged up now. I'm fine. Don't worry.
Okay, good to know. So I'll start us off with a quick question, and just in regards to how the English wine category and English sparkling wine specifically, the forward-looking outlook. Now that famed and renowned champagne producers have started producing wines and purchasing vineyards in the UK, is that some sort of conversation among UK winemakers, or some sort of, I guess, marker for how people are taking the category finally seriously, and what is to come in the future?
Yeah, it's definitely been, I mean, it's still quite a recent thing. It's just in the last 3 or 4 years that started to happen. But we see it definitely as a positive. And I think pretty much everybody in English winemaking feels the same way, because you know, if the Champenois are coming to England to make wine, surely that's the best possible indication that everybody in the world now recognizes the potential that we have. It's not, I don't think anybody feels like people are muscling in on English wine, because yes, the champagne houses are coming to England, but they're coming to England to make English wine.
Yeah.
It's not going to be champagne. So what remains to be seen is how those producers will market their wine. So I mean, one of the biggest producers is Taittinger, and they planted in Kent, and they haven't yet released any wine. It's too early, but it'd be interesting. They've named the producer Domaine Evremont. So there's this very sort of Franco. So yeah, it'll be interesting. Will it be seen as kind of a separate project or a side story of Taittinger? But either way, I think it just lends credibility to what we're doing in the UK, and perhaps speaking more as a broad kind of the English scene. I mean, Nyetimber, we're now very well known in the English wine as the kind of leaders of the English wine world, but it'll help other producers who are just sort of more up and coming. It'll raise that awareness as well. So yeah, it's only a good thing.
Well, great. Thank you for that. And then I guess, well, wait, we have a question here that I wanted to catch before we move forward. What's been the best vintage for Nyetimber from Alec Wine? I guess that sort of depends on which wine you're talking about, but have there been any standout vintages in your experience?
There's certainly some standout ones and some not standout ones as well. In recent years, in terms of wines that we've released, 2009 was absolutely brilliant wines. I mean, beautiful, beautiful year, and it was a fascinating one actually, because the wines were very generous, very ripe. It was our biggest harvest. It was our ripest fruit. And everybody hears that and they say, oh, was it a hot year? Was it a dry year? And actually it was very, very average. It was very normal. The temperatures in Sussex were very average. And as you can imagine, a lot of people, when it comes to English wine, want to attribute global warming as the only reason that we make good wine here now. And what the 2009 kind of demonstrated was that, yeah, it definitely has had an impact, but it's not the reason that we make good wine. You know, even in normal British years, that's what we make great wine in. The problem is that we so rarely get a consistent kind of a consistent few years like that. And in terms of kind of just every box was ticked pretty much, that was 2018 for us. Everybody in England made. I mean, we had some people making 3 times their normal annual production. Just everything came together. It was, again, not a sort of bizarrely hot year. There was a couple of months without rain. It was quite unusually dry, but everything just came together. No real frost at the start of the season, no disease at the end. It was perfect fruit. And we have to wait. We have to wait now another 2 or 3 years before those wines are ready to drink. But when they do, it's going to be exciting. Yeah.
I would certainly hope so, and I'm sure that's the case. A couple more questions coming in here. So from Candace, Wine Chat, do you find there's more demand than supply, or not there yet?
Very good question, and actually leads quite neatly on from that sort of 2018, because basically up until that point we were selling everything that we make basically, and so demand was definitely above supply. But what it meant is that we had been, I mean, speaking of as Nyetimber, we had been quite cautious about not overextending. So one thing that we've been really keen to do for a long time is take our wines more abroad, but we were always very cautious that we weren't going to prioritize too many markets and then have a bad couple of vintages and suddenly we'd be left without stock in the UK. And that has happened to a few English producers. So what things like 2018 did then is, when everybody's got suddenly a lot of wine, we can suddenly look at so many more opportunities. So we had people saying, is there going to be a glut of English sparkling wine? And I think there won't be. It'll simply allow us to take the wine elsewhere and take it around the world, but also work with more kind of, you know, sports events and cultural events where we can put our wine in front of people, really raise awareness, which we already do a fair amount of anyway. So I think we'll keep the demand up as the supply goes up as well.
Amazing. Thank you for that. Moving on to the next one here from Chris Struck. What are your hopes for future UK delineation of future wine appellation laws as they pertain to sparkling production or Nyetimber?
Interesting one. Interesting using the word hopes. It's a very good question, and it's kind of depending on which month you ask, there's a slightly different answer. Basically, still there isn't much in the way of appellations, and for the benefit of anybody who might not know what that means, that's basically a collective term used for a region or a style of wine. So, for example, Champagne or Bordeaux, and there's very little legislation on that. Now, for us at Nyetimber, that doesn't mean a huge deal because we're already doing all of the things that an appellation should try and protect, like protecting the minimum aging or the right grape varieties being used or, appropriate vineyard sites. We're already doing all of that. What I think it will help is that if at some point in the future we have people trying to make loads of cheap bulk wine in England, appellation laws prevent them doing that. But it's not really something that we're afraid of because it's not easy to make cheap bulk wine in England. Nobody really does it. What it has resulted in is that we've had a few people who have kind of, and this is kind of my personal opinion more than anything else, but people who have tried to bring about appellations for specific counties or specific areas. And firstly, I think we're a little bit too early to be doing that. It's a little bit too soon. We're still learning about our vineyards. We're still learning about our land. But also people are tending to try and do this based on county. And counties in England, they often have, it's no relevance to terroir. There's no relevance to geographical differences. It's not like going into Burgundy and you've got Vosne Romanée is different from Louis Saint George because of this. In West Sussex, you can have 4 different soil types. You can have sites that are perfect for sparkling wine, sites that are appalling for it. And you can have exactly the same in Hampshire next that Sussex is, one entity where there might be endless different producers. It's a bit sort of a cart before the horse, maybe. I actually saw about a year ago, I think it might have been Eric Asimov, New York Times, saying when he was asked about this and talking about this, I think it might have been him who said, maybe we should try and establish the footprint before we start naming the toes when it comes to and whoever, if it was him or not, but whoever said it, it really kind of encapsulated the idea for me. Very
sounds like an Eric kind of
an ongoing conversation. Yeah.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for addressing that. I think we have time for one last question before we let you off the hook. Here's a question from Jules Colang. What is the larger English sparkling wine industry like? Do producers work together to promote the category, etc.? So what kind of level of, I guess, partnership and collaboration is there?
Yeah, there's a lot of collaboration. It's a small industry still. To give you an idea, the average, if you sort of exclude the 2018 year, the average production in England and Wales is about 6 or 7 million bottles of wine, and that's still sparkling. That's the whole lot. So when you compare that to even Champagne, which is about just over 300, it's a tiny amount compared to that. So yeah, we are let's say in competition with each other for a listing in a fine restaurant, but on the whole, we're very much a collective and a collaboration. And there's an industry body called WineGB who are really good at organizing a lot of kind of awareness and working with particularly international groups as well. I was out in Japan last year and there was a big movement there about raising awareness for British produce, and of course we came into that. So yeah, it's a really nice industry to work in. Everybody's kind of excited. It's quite a youthful industry. I don't just mean it's young people, whatever age you are, people have that kind of youthful enthusiasm and are really keen to make a mark for English wine, not just themselves, but for English wine as a whole. So yeah.
Thank you. One last quick question here from Pia Zabo. Will there ever be Midlands or border wines?
Well, there are already wines from pretty much everywhere in the UK. We at Nyetimber don't have vineyards up there, and you don't really see much sparkling wine up there. And at the risk of offending any Midlands or border winemakers who might be watching Live Midnight, I think it's fair to say that the majority of the consistently good producers you see in the south of England, and that's just because it's the right weather conditions down there. It's warmer. You have that maritime influence as well. The Gulf Stream has an effect. So the further north you go, the more difficult it comes to make that kind of sparkling wine. So the further north you go, you do tend to see more of the kind of old style English grape varieties, which were sort of Germanic crosses. So things like Huxelrebe and Dornfelder and Rondo, which again can make very nice wines, but they are a little bit more sort of cold resistant, which is why they're growing up there. Yeah. But we'll see what happens in the future. You never know.
We certainly will. Thanks for those insights. Well, I feel like we could keep going, but I know you have other priorities. So thank you so much for your time, Stefan, and hopefully we'll be able to do this again. We encourage everybody to pick up a bottle of Nyetimber Classic Cuvee or any other wine from the portfolio. Available on wine.com, Gary's, Wine Searcher, etc. So cheers to that. I already need a refill, so I feel like that's
the thing. Hole in the glass.
That's a recommendation if there ever was one.
Well, okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much
for having me on. Yeah. So thank you to you and to the whole Colangelo team, and thanks everybody for tuning in. So our first Instagram live, as you say, hopefully many more to follow. We'll much more to share, much more to chat about digitally, and when we all get back to normal, hope to bring some wines out to you to taste together. So
can't wait. Thanks again, Stefan. Have a
Cheers
good one. Cheers. Bye bye.